We're going to call this meeting to order at 6:32 p.m. on February 9, 2023. And this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission. If the Spanish language interpreters, Maria and Luisa, can please give the information on Spanish language interpretation now, that would be very helpful.
Buenas tardes. Se va a empezar la reunión ahorita a las 6:32 el 9 de febrero de 2023. Esta es una reunión pública de la ciudad de Portland de la Comisión de Responsabilidad Policíaca y va a estar grabada. Si desean interpretación en español, tienen que ir abajo, abajo donde dice interpretación y le pulsan el botón donde dice Spanish, ¿verdad? Y entonces van a escuchar, van a poder ver el video, pero a mí me escuchan o la otra intérprete, ¿verdad? Abajo donde dice Language Interpretation, que ahorita no lo veo. I don't see it right now. It doesn't say Language Interpretation.
It gets set up after, like in 10 seconds after this spiel, basically.
Okay. Entonces ya lo van a poner donde diga Language Interpretation y le pulsan el botón de Spanish donde dice, ¿verdad? Para que vayan al canal de español. Okay.
Thank you very much. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Andrea and Heather. Please pin their feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance, but please note this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city offers access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and/or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversations during the meeting and future meetings agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I'd like now to turn the meeting over to Tirsa, to co-chair Tirsa, please.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and the land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetrated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Tearseth. I'd like to ask that Victoria resume sharing. We're going to take a look at our community agreements. There's 3 slides for the community agreements. I'd like us to read each slide silently, and then I will ask a question on the 3rd slide. Slide 2, please. The next slide, please. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commissioner members in gently and with compassion. If you are called in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in the space while still respecting the community agreements and making space for everyone. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our colleagues and collaborators if needed? Thank you for those raising their hands so I can see. I appreciate that. Thank you. Now I would like to invite the co-chairs in.
Thank you. We'll be discussing the timeline now, as we do most meetings. This meeting is a part of the Police Accountability Commission's powers and duties phase of work, which focuses on the functions of the new system. Future phases of work will develop the form of the new system, as well as how it relates to the rest of city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one. The Commission will present all proposed changes to City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval, and has requested by consensus that the City Council allow the Commission to work through October 29th, 2023, as envisioned in the settlement agreement. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide shows the outcome documents for the powers and duties phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the Commission. The Commission has completed its work on the areas of agreement on access to information and the areas of agreement on structural oversight. Today, it will be discussing, begin discussion of the areas of agreement on officer accountability, referred to the full commission last Thursday. And then this slide is the current project plan for the powers and duties phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout this phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now to the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among commission members as to the functions of the new system. Today's meeting is part of the blue box with the red border near the upper right corner of the screen, as you can see under January and early February. Next slide, thank you. Following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the PAC of the Police Accountability Commission. Specifically, we'd like to highlight the Police Accountability Commission has one more meeting scheduled for this phase of work at 6:30 p.m. next Monday on February 13th. It finishes if the Police Accountability Commission finishes the phase of work today, that meeting will be canceled. But it is likely to happen as we have a big lift. There is no meeting on Monday, February 20th, as the city observes President's Day, and the structure and details phase will begin with subcommittee meetings the week of February 27th. Today's meeting agenda. It includes working through the draft areas of agreement on officer accountability as previously stated, flagging items for further discussion, resolving items, and if possible, approving the final document as the Police Accountability Commission areas of agreement on officer accountability. All document approval processes include a review of the Police Accountability Commission's values and goals and hearing public comment on the specific document. The Police Accountability Commission will also discuss draft definitions of two of the terms council has mandated that the commission define, which are accountability and independent judgment, as we've discussed in previous meetings. The commission will receive open public comment as well, and later in the agenda, there are next steps, including a phase of work transition conversations. Please note that the meeting may run long, but we'll be stopping at 8:45 to do the next step section, and then we'll circle back to the discussion on the officer accountability document after that, after we've gone through a few of those. Cool. I think we'll be moving to the next portion. Go ahead. Okay, cool. Sweet. I'll just keep going then. So we're going to start discussing the document now that was previously mentioned, the areas of agreement for officer accountability. And there have been various emails that have talked about this, but I'll just mention it again here for in case anyone hasn't seen those. But to set ourselves up for success, to try and get through the document in both days, because we have to get through the document from by Monday, by the end of Monday's meeting. We're hoping to get through at least halfway through the document today, which is sections A through C. A through B is about halfway, but we're hoping to do a little bit past that because we're going to be flagging we're following a 5-minute rule for discussion. So if we can't resolve any like concerns or questions within those 5 minutes, we'll be flagging it and going back to it later, which means that one will not be resolved. So we'll have to go into C a little bit. And also considering that it takes time to actually approve the document at the end and time to, at the beginning of the meeting to do what we're doing right now, like introduce everything, that takes time as well. So hopefully A through C around there would be ideal. Please keep that in consideration when we're going through this. And the co-chairs, yours truly, all of us, will be giving a 1-minute warning after 4 minutes of discussion when we are having a discussion, so that people know that we're getting close to the end of our discussion time and we're going to have to move on soon. Cool. I'll pass it to co-chairs Charlie and Dan of the subcommittee on officer accountability to explain the document.
Thank you, co-chair Oriana Bauer. So I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm co-chair of the officer accountability subcommittee with my co-chair Charlie Michelle Wesley, who's here also. We're going to go through the flow chart that we showed you at the last meeting first, and then we'll head into the document. So we're not going to stop during the flow chart presentation. Can we put that flow chart up on the screen? Thank you. So I said this last time, but I want to thank Commissioner Aiken once again for creating the original version of this. And even though it's very complicated looking, it's still just a summary of the longer outline we'll be looking at later. So we're hoping you can write down any questions you have. If they're not answered when we review the full document, please ask them when we get to that part of the workflow. Turn it over to my co-chair, the blue section.
Commissioner Charlie, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, co-chair Dan Handelman. I'm Charlie Michelle Wesley, co-chair of Officer Accountability phase, or subcommittee rather. And staff, could you show the blue and the green as best as you can section at the top? I'm going to start there. Okay. So in the blue section, incident advocate, the first thing that happens is an incident between an officer and a community member. Regardless of whether the community member files a complaint or the board is required to investigate, the community member is known as the complainant. The board will assign an advocate to help the complainant through the system. As far as we can tell from our research, no other system in the US has this advocate role. And notably, the current system only provides one at the appeal level. And this advocate will be with them from the beginning to the very end. And then in the green section on the right side, that is the section officer complaints. This is for the complaints where an officer complains about another officer and there is no community member involved. On the right side, you will see if the officer chooses, they can turn to an internal investigation by internal affairs or whatever appropriate agency to investigate. On the left side is an option for the officer to file with the board if they prefer, which will lead to the preliminary investigation section. I'll turn it over to Co-Chair Dan.
Okay, so that is the orange section over here on the left side. And preliminary investigations, the staff will find out what the complaint's about, whether the officer's on duty and what policies are involved. In some cases, they might dismiss the complaint, which the complainant can appeal. In some cases, the complainant may want to informally resolve the complaint by talking to the officer's supervisor. If the board agrees and the supervisor agrees, it will be handled informally. In cases with low-level allegations, the complainant can agree to mediation. If all agree to and the mediation doesn't succeed, the case will still go to investigation. And if there's no dismissal, informal investigation, or mediation, the case will go to full investigation, which is the purple section.
That would be back to me. Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. In the purple section, full investigation, board investigators will look into the allegations, whether the officer violated bureau policy, known as the administrative investigation. If there is a possibility that the officer committed a criminal offense, the case will also be referred for criminal investigation, which is not in the purview of the board. If for some reason the full investigation is called off by investigators, a decision not to investigate, which is slightly different from a dismissal, the complainant can appeal. The investigators then turn over an investigative report to the board. Back to Co-Chair Dan.
Or what we're calling the pink section, although we couldn't quite describe this color quite 100% correctly. So anyway, so this is where the hearings happen. So there's a hearings panel that'll be made up of some kind of subsection of the board that will hold a preliminary hearing. And that if the panel wants there to be more investigation, they'll send it back to the investigators. But either following the preliminary hearing or following the new investigation, the panel will then hold a full hearing on the complaint. The officer is found to be out of policy on one or more allegations, the hearing will enter the discipline process. And if there are allegations where the officer was not found out of policy, the complainant may appeal. There are 3 findings other than out of policy, which are in policy, insufficient evidence, and unfounded. Those aren't reflected on the flow chart right now. So then if there is, as I said, an out of policy finding, that brings us to the red section, which is below. The discipline process, according to the charter, the board decides on the discipline. Notably, the citizen discipline guide is now referred to as a corrective action guide. And again, we didn't reflect that on the document. The officer may accept the proposed discipline and then the case will end. If the officer does not accept the discipline, unlike the community member, they have 4 possible appeal routes. This is because they are public employees and these rights are enshrined in law. One option is a due process or louder mill hearing where they can express to the board any mitigating factors they think should change the outcome. Second is a possibility is a Portland Civil Service Board hearing. This is in the city charter for all employees, and we've written in that the board should have a seat at the table for such hearings. Number 3 option was they could file a grievance, which could lead to arbitration, and we've written in that the board will have a seat at the table at those hearings as well. Number 4 is they could also file an appeal with the board about substantiated findings, much the same way they can community member can file them for non-substantiated findings, right? So the officer has that option as well. And that brings us to the appeals in the deep purple section, which Charlie will go over.
Thank you, Coach Dan. Okay, so in the deep purple section, appeals, an appeals panel made up of board members will hear the appeal. It may be the same members who made up the hearings panel. So if the panel agrees with the original findings, the process ends. If the panel thinks more investigation is needed, they send it back, which could lead to the findings being the same or changing. If the panel makes new findings, which include that the officer violated policy, it leads to the discipline process. And now let's turn to the full outline document.
Thank you so much, co-chairs. We will now move into discussing the draft areas of agreement on officer accountability. We ask you to follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated and remember that we are now using a weighted stack in our discussions. Finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. We will be reading the section in full, then asking if there are any questions or proposed changes. If there aren't any, we'll ask, can we move on? And move on to the next section. If there are proposed changes, we'll discuss them, then ask if there's consensus. And when all of these are either resolved in some way or flagged for further discussion, we'll ask, can we move on? And move on to the next section. Would the co-chairs like to get us started?
I think Co-Chair Michelle Wesley is going to start us with the intro paragraphs, which are on page 3.
Do you want me to read all those paragraphs?
Let me know if you want me to read one. Just
Okay. So again, Charlie Michelle Wesley, co-chair of the Officer Accountability Subcommittee. The Police Accountability Commission was asked to complete the following tasks, which were assigned to the subcommittee on officer accountability: to describe case handling and investigate processes, complaint, investigation, determination, discipline, etc. processes, including workflow description, compliance with state laws, consideration of the existing procedure, and the addition of the Community Police Oversight Board. The Portland City Charter indicates the new board will be made up of community members who are authorized to hire the board's director, ensure investigations are conducted into misconduct allegations, and to discipline officers who have violated policy. In accordance with Portland Police Association Contract Section 62.7 and U.S. Department of Justice Section 8 and paragraph 195C, the Police Accountability Commission has designed the following outline of the system from the time an incident occurs to the time discipline, if any, is imposed. Should I read the city charter sections or move on?
I think you should read this part about our values.
Yeah, I wanted to go there, but I didn't know if you wanted me to read the city charter or the PPA contract.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, this is for everybody to hear. We're not going to read the footnotes unless there's some reason to do so, but they're there so that you can see where the information that we're talking about came from, and they're extensive. There are a lot of footnotes in this document.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. So in designing this outline, we have kept in mind the values of the police accountability. 1, equity and inclusion. 2, anti-racism. 3, harm reduction. 4, transparency and trustworthiness. 5, community-centered. And 6, effectiveness.
Yeah, so I'm going to read this this definition, and I'm going to just to echo that number 5, community-centered. I just want to make it really clear that as we were designing this in the subcommittee, we wanted to make clear that this system should be focused on a community member who potentially was harmed by a police officer, and so that's going to affect a lot of the proposals that we're putting forward tonight. So complainant here in the definitions says that it may mean a person who has filed a complaint about misconduct or has been the recipient of alleged misconduct, even if they did not file a complaint.
Are there any questions in any of these sections? Can we move on? I'd love to see hands movement. Thank you so much.
Okay. I will start us out with A, intake of complaints. A1, advocates and interview process. A, the new board will provide an advocate or complaint navigator for each community member. Roman numeral 1, the advocate will be appropriately culturally attuned to the complainant's needs. B, civilians can additionally have 2 support people, including an attorney, for a total of up to 3 support people. However, the support person cannot be a witness to the incident. Roman numeral 1, if the complainant is an officer who already has the automatic ability to have a bargaining unit representative and an attorney, they can also bring a peer officer, community member of their choosing, who is not a witness to the incident, by the way. This means they may also have as many as 3 support people. Roman numeral 2, if the officer is not a part of the bargaining unit, they will be assigned an advocate from the pool or community members. The officer can decline this option. And C, interviews will be scheduled around civilians' work schedules and can be rescheduled if need be. Roman numeral 1, interviews will include accommodations for people with disabilities, interpretations if needed. I was wondering, did you want me to read those one at a time and stop and ask questions, or is it okay to go through them like I just did?
I think it's okay to go through them. I'm going to ask now if there are any questions. Commissioner AJ.
Yeah, so I was just wondering about the appropriately culturally attuned to the complainant's needs, just because I wasn't sure how we would be able to guarantee that. I wonder if, like, in my mind, I was thinking it might be better to say something about like an attempt, or like we will be reaching out, if, I don't even know necessarily how to say it, but we will be partnering with the appropriate agencies to make sure that, it's as culturally attuned as possible or something like that. Just because, I wasn't sure like how that would be played out, or how, I mean, in some cases it might not be like literally possible in the sense.
En uno de esos
Like, I like
casos
what
no va a
Debbie,
tener como que sentido. Hablando.
Uh-oh.
I just I just saw Debbie's comments, and I like that. So something about like every effort will be made, or something like that, because
O algo así.
Bear with us
Yeah.
just a second.
Okay.
So sorry to interrupt. Just bear with us a moment while we get the interpretation channel fixed.
Okay.
And while we're here in a moment, if we can speak without our hands around our mouths,
sorry.
that would be nice, because then our interpreters have an easier time of seeing the words that we're trying to say.
Okay.
And it's not just you, Ajay.
Are we ready to go?
Well, I want to call on staff. Staff had their hand raised, and then I'll go to Commissioner Co-Chair Dan.
Yeah, the 2 things. 1, yes, the interpretation part is fixed, and 2, on the content, this is something that is likely to be to answer the question as opposed to the proposed text change. The how does that happen is sort of a phase 4 structure and details question, because that is something that would either be a staff volunteer or contractor, and what that is on the next phase's agenda. So just wanted to flag that as a potential garden plot item. The answering the question, that's not to do with the text conversation.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Charlie, then Commissioner Dan.
So I was going to say just what Samir said. But I do like, to the best of our ability, but let's try to make this happen. Phase 4.
Very good. Commissioner Dan.
Yeah, I think I was also going to say the same thing as staff, but I think the language that probably should go in this document should be, to the extent possible, the advocate will be appropriately culturally too. Yeah, okay. I proposed change there.
Do you propose that language change? Co-Chair Dan?
That's what I'm proposing, yes.
Very good. Thank you so much. Commissioner Seema. Welcome in.
Yes, greetings, everybody. I think one of my questions is that what are we going to be discussing, like maybe down the road, as far as like what methodologies we're going to use to ensure the cultural addressing the what is cultural appropriate and how we facilitate that, even because it's one thing to just kind of say it, but being a person of multiple foreign cultures, I can see how the question would arise, like how would we be facilitating it, for instance, whether culturally Somali or culturally Syrian or culturally Afghan, which would be completely different um, as far as community members. Like what is our resource to be able to make sure that we're tapping into this?
I'm going to ask staff to
Yeah.
see.
I think that's almost, yeah, maybe a co-chair's question. I'll defer to co-chair Dan on that since he unmuted.
I mean, Commissioner Husseini, I appreciate that, but again, that's something for the next phase. We're just designing what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. We're going to be doing that in the next phase. So, you know, we had that flagged, and we actually had it flagged from the subcommittee as well. But thank you very much for your input. Thank you.
That's excellent. I think that was like part of my first question was like, am I overthinking this? Is this something that we're going to address at a different phase? So cool. That's awesome. Thank you, Dan. Commissioner Handelman.
Thank you so much. Co-Chair Charlie.
Is my hand up? Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to ask the question. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of making the proposed change.
Wait, say that again, please.
Yes. Please raise your hand if you are in favor of the proposed change. I see people with their hands raised. Please raise your hand if you are opposed to the change being made. If there's strong opposition. No strong opposition. Okay. So this section is, can we move on to the next section? I see we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, so this is my section. And Dr. Musa, I was a little thrown by that. The questions are usually, is there any strong opposition? And then, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All
My
right.
bad.
Thank
you so much.
My section A2, timelines to file. The timeline to file a complaint shall be 12 months after the incident. And that's something you can see in the footnotes where we pulled that 12 months from during discussions. I'd like to keep reading though. Subsection 1, the timeline can be extended by the board chair and or director for good cause. The time limit on filing a complaint will be extended until a civil case has concluded and or for the term of the involved community member's incarceration to a maximum of 5 years. And there's another footnote there. This was a result of a long discussion we had in the subcommittee. And then subsection 3 is good cause for extending the timeline may include, but is not limited to, fear of retaliation, or if an officer who was not previously identified has their identity become known after the 12-month deadline.
Are there any questions or concerns about this passage? Can we move on? Connie? Yes, Sophia, very good. Okay, thank you. We can move on.
Okay, this section is mine. A3, who can file? A, anyone who experiences or witnesses alleged misconduct can file a complaint. The right to file a complaint is absolute and unconditional, and there's footnotes that you can refer to. And I think I might do this a little bit different. A1, parents and guardians should be able to file complaints on behalf of minors up to the age of 18. Youth can file complaints on their own beginning at age 15, with that age based on healthcare laws. Another footnote. A2, the complainant pool is inclusive regardless of age, immigration status, residence, criminal record, or language used. Incarcerated people can file complaints. Another footnote. A3, sorry. Anonymous complaints will be accepted and will be prioritized depending on the nature and severity of allegations and for more minor complaints and the board's workload. A4, complaints involving community members can be filed by third parties, individuals, or organizations.
Let's just go through the A section here.
Sounds good.
Okay, and then we'll go to B and C. Are there any questions or concerns with the A section? Commissioner Ajay.
I was just wondering if it's the case that like children can only file with a parent or guardian, or if like a minor under the age of 14 can file through like an organization or an individual that's not necessarily their parent or guardian.
Commissioner Dan?
Apparently left my mute off. I apologize for that. I think if you read these two things together, that's the implication that they cannot file on their own before age 15, but it says that complaints involved community members can be filed by third parties. So yeah, I think taken together, if they don't want to use their parent or guardian to file, they can go through an organization.
Thank you. I thought I saw another hand up.
Yeah, that was mine. I was just going to say that that's a really good question, and I wouldn't be opposed to adding a clause in there to clarify that. But like Commissioner, Co-Chair Handelman said, it might already be in there, so that's totally fine if we don't want to add something as well.
Very good. Any other questions or comments here? Commissioner Monica?
Maybe an easy fix would be anonymous, complaints involving any community members can be filed by third parties, right? So that it is clear that even minors can do it that way.
Down in 4. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a strong opposition to changing of adding the word any in number 4? Is there general agreement to changing to adding any in number 4? I see agreement. Thank you. We can move on to B.
Okay, let's see here.
B and C.
All right. B, police officers with, oops, where'd it go? Okay, police officers with city police or with other agencies can file complaints against Portland police officers. That kind of read strange. Anyway, do we want to stop at B?
B and C are fine.
Okay, C. No member of the community or the police bureau shall face retaliation, intimidation, coercion, or any adverse action for filing a complaint reporting misconduct, or cooperating with a misconduct investigation.
Are there any questions or concerns?
Well, well, let me
Okay,
raise my hand.
Okay, Commissioner Ajay.
It just seems like we can't guarantee that. So it's kind of like worded strangely. So I wonder if there's something about saying like, if community members, face retaliation, intimidation, coercion, adverse action for filing complaint, then there will be an investigation or there will be some kind of recourse. Because I think that's what it's kind of trying to say. Because obviously we don't have control over whether they retaliate or not, or intimidate or not. So maybe it's more of like saying like what happens if they do that in order to discourage that kind of behavior.
Thank you, Commissioner Ajay. Co-Chair Charlie.
I didn't mean to have my hand up. I was reading it over.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Co-Chair Dan, do you want to address Commissioner Ajay's question?
Yeah, I was trying to find the footnote in the other, is that actually that's language that's directly from the current Portland City Code, and they can't guarantee it either. I mean, if we want to rewrite it, it's okay with me. We lifted that language directly from the city code.
Okay.
I think that's fine then.
Staff?
No, I was going to say the exact thing. The link's in the chat.
Okay. So Commissioner Ajay, you're okay with the way it's written? Okay, very good. Can we move on? Yes, we can. Very good.
Okay, it's my turn now. So this is A3, and there's 3 sections. So I'm just going to read the part that's on the screen, and well, unless B goes beyond there.
A4.
Okay.
A4.
I'll just do, oh, sorry, A4. So I'm just going to do A and B, and we'll come back to the other stuff in a minute. So the complaint process is inclusive and offers multiple methods and accommodations to assure access. Sub 1, filing will be offered in person or by mail, phone, email, online, texting, or by other common technological means of communication. Collect calls will be accepted. Sub 2, translation for documents and for verbal communication shall be offered with appropriate interpretation to be inclusive of people for whom English is not their preferred language and people with disabilities. Sub 3, the complainant shall be asked to state their preferred method of communication at the beginning of the process. And then B says complaints called in to members of the police bureau, including internal affairs, or the appropriate city investigatory body, or to the city's information line, such as 3011, shall be directed to the board staff. I think the closed parentheses after internal affairs is supposed to be after the word body, right? Including internal affairs or the appropriate city investigatory body. Close parentheses, yes, thank you. That's just a typo, thanks.
Are there any questions or concerns? Can we move on? Very good. Next section, please.
Great, okay, so I'm going to read C, D, and E together. The board's offices shall be open to accept complaints for longer hours than Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., including early mornings, weekend times, and evenings. And just to cut off the questions, we're not going to define those hours in the code, but that's something we can talk about in the next section if we think that we should define it as a commission before we turn everything over. We're just doing the workflow here tonight. D, the Bureau shall inform the board immediately upon their knowledge that a member is engaged in conduct that may be subject to criminal and or administrative investigation. I think there's supposed to be a footnote on that. And E, the board shall work with staff to be sure complaint forms are widely available.
Are there any questions or concerns on these 3 passages? Can we move on? Beautiful, thank you. Next section, A5. If you're speaking, Charlie, you're on mute.
Keep forgetting, sorry. A5, providing information to complainants for providing information to officers, see investigations. A, during intake, the complainant shall be informed of any obligations the board may have to report something that is stated to them as part of a complaint and to provide the complaint itself to the involved officer. It is important that the board not turn over any admission of civil violations, criminal conduct, or criminal intent unless there is an imminent threat of harm to the complainant or others. That part of the investigation or interview which could incriminate the complainant in criminal proceedings will be considered confidential. There's a footnote. And then A1, during intake, staff shall not express opinions about the complainant or the truth or merit of their allegations. A2, however, if the staff conducting intake has some kind of bias or conflict regarding the complainant or nature of the allegations, they should reveal that bias. If possible, another staff member should complete the intake. Otherwise, the person with the conflict should hand the case off after intake.
Let's just do this section A.
Sure thing.
Do we need to go to the flagged comment to notice? I can't read it, so.
Yes, I'm trying to read it as well.
Flag for further discussion, wording, conceptual agreement. Commissioner Monica.
I'm a
Flag-
little, I'm a little bit concerned about if the staff conducting intake has some kind of bias or conflict regarding the complaint. They should reveal that bias, but at that point, I have a feeling that that person should just turn over the information or to somebody else. Because you don't want to put into, threaten the validity of the intake if the intake continues after that bias has been identified. That's my only concern with that part.
Are there other words than if possible, another staff member should complete the intake, otherwise the person with the conflict should hand the case off after intake? I mean, is there?
I think it should say, instead of if possible, maybe at that point, another staff member should complete the intake, period. Maybe. I mean, it may not be possible, but I'm hoping that this board is well staffed and that there'll be other people there that could take over, right?
Next phase.
Commissioner Rogers.
I mean, we know that a lot of bias is unconscious, right? So is it possible for the complainant to request someone else do the intake based on what they perceive as bias of, the original person who's filling out the form? Like if they hear something and they're like, well, that's racist, but the person doesn't think that it's racist, like, can they request that someone else fill out their intake if they perceive bias, but the person who's filling it out does not?
No, I've never had Pueblos Hermanos, but yeah, it does.
Commissioner or Co-Chair Dan?
Oh, well, this is why I said, this is how we ended up with such a long document. Every time we came up with a solution, there was another question that got asked. So we didn't address that. I wouldn't mind adding a section 3 that said that, at the request of the complainant, another staff person shall complete the intake.
May request another staff person to complete the intake. Beautiful. I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Monica. And what about you, Ajay?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, I mean, can we add something like if they perceive bias or something, you know, just like, we don't want people to just be asking just because, right? We want there to be reason why or something. I don't know what the right phrase, but I think that's good.
And I'm just gonna, that should go at the beginning of the sentence, so it's not modifying the staff person.
If they perceive bias, complainants may request another staff person to complete the intake. Very good. All right. Any other conversation or questions on A5, 1, 2, or 3? Commissioner Dan.
I just want to mention, we had a long discussion about the legal implications of not turning over all the information that the complainant said, but I think, and Commissioner McDowell, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we came to a consensus that we're okay with the way it's written now. If it's not relevant to what the officer did to the complainant, then they don't have to turn it over to the officer. Is that correct, Commissioner McDowell? Are you still there?
I am here. Good evening, everybody. Catherine McDowell. I use she, her pronouns. And my concern about this section was we had originally talked about not providing portions of the complaint if some part of it might incriminate the complainant. And I think we ended up, because of my concern that if the officer about whom the complaint was filed was not given a copy of the complaint, they would have I think a legitimate ground for saying that they were being deprived of due process because they weren't seeing the full complaint against them. So we made clear that they get the complaint. It's just if in the course of the investigation, sort of tangential criminal activity or potential criminal activity is mentioned, then that is not going to be gratuitously included and provided to the police, which could result in criminal charges against the complainant. So that's why that is such a long section, because we had a long discussion around balancing protection for the complainant against the due process rights of the officer.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Catherine. We're hitting close to our 5 minutes. I would like to ask, with the sections in green, is there strong opposition to changing the text to what it is now from what it was? Is there general agreement to changing the text to what it is now? I see wonderful agreement. Thank you so much. Let's continue.
So is that whole section okay then? I wasn't.
A5, 1, 2, and 3 are fine. Have been agreed upon.
Okay.
I see Commissioner Sophia. Okay, never mind. Keep going, please.
Okay.
So there's still 4 more subsections or 5 more subsections, Commissioner Co-Chair Michelle.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm getting ready. B. Complainants shall receive records of their complaint, including 1, confirmation of the receipt of the complaint, including a summary of the allegations. 2, literature about the board and its process, including explanation of confidentiality issues. 3, as appropriate, a medical release form for records related to the complaint. 4, notice if the investigation cannot be completed in the ordinary timeline. 5, notification of completion of the investigation and a final report. And 6, a survey about their experience with the complaint system.
Let's do B, 1 through 6. Are there any questions or concerns? Can we move on? Thank you.
Okay. I think maybe I could read the rest.
Yes.
Yes, since they're just individual for the most part. C, information for the complainant about the complaint shall be made available online. And just pay attention, there are footnotes throughout this. D, the complainant should have access to as much information about their complaint as legally possible, even if some material has to be redacted. D1, the advocate, as described in A1, shall have access to all available records in order to best advise the complainant. Even information the complainant or their community representatives are not legally authorized to access. Such materials may also be redacted to comply with privacy laws. E, the complainant shall not incur costs for access to information about their complaint. And F, communication shall not be made by postcard or other means of written communication that jeopardizes privacy.
Thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. Are there any questions or concerns about sections C, D, E, or F? Can we move on? Yes, we can. Next section, please. A6.
Okay. My turn again. Okay, there's six subsections in this A6 types of, I'm going to stop before B because B is very long. Okay, so this is types of conduct and complaints the new agency will investigate and determine outcomes. A, the board shall investigate certain police actions, including but not limited to 1, all deaths in custody, including effective/constructive custody and uses of deadly force. I'll come back to that in a second. All complaints of force that result in injury, discrimination against a protected class, violations of federal or state constitutional rights. So all of that's from the charter, except for that concept of effective and constructive custody. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, and we should probably put that in the definitions. That is, there was a case where the officers surrounded somebody in a car and they took their own life, allegedly. And the officers didn't cause the death, but it was investigated anyway as potential use of deadly force because the person was technically in police custody. And so that's called effective or constructive custody, even though, so the police didn't have them, physically have them. So that's what that means. Okay.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Are there any questions or concerns on this section? Can we move on? I see.
Right. So here comes the big one.
Okay.
It's B, and we have a very long list of. So basically what was handed to us is that the charter says anything that's in city code, the board will investigate also. So we're thinking that we should put all this stuff in for them to investigate. Okay. B, the board shall also investigate the allegations of 1, dishonesty/untruthfulness, including perjury. 2, false reports and concealing evidence. 3, sexual assaults, sexual misconduct, or sexual harassment. 4, domestic violence. 5, unlawful search or arrest. 6, neglect of duty. 7, discourtesy, including the use of profanity. 8, improper discharge of a firearm. 9, criminal conduct, including off-duty criminal conduct. 10, improper or illegal act, omission, or decision that directly affects a person or property. 11, violation of orders which affect a community member. 12, harassment. 13, intimidation. 14, retaliation. 15, force used at protests. 16, abuse of authority, such as using police credentials in a personal dispute. 17, officer failure to identify. 18, theft of money. 19, corruption. 20, allegations of affiliation with white supremacist groups. I'll flag that and come back to it. And 21, cases of substantial public interest. And 22, where data show a pattern of inappropriate policies. So with the exception of the one about the affiliation with white supremacist groups, all of these came from either Portland or another jurisdiction during our research phase.
Are there any questions or concerns with B? Can we move on? Thank
Ruby.
you.
Okay, C. So it's a slightly smaller list. The board may also investigate any alleged misconduct directly affecting the public, including work-related allegations such as tardiness, if they affect a community member. Or 2, other cases which do not originate from a complaint at the discretion of the board. I think we should just stop after that one, and we'll do the last 3 together.
Very good. Are there any questions or concerns with C? Can we move on? Very good, we can.
Ruby, okay, so D, E, and F. D, if the involved officer is within their 18-month probationary period and is fired by the Bureau, the board shall complete the investigation. E, when the only officers involved are from another jurisdiction, the board shall ask permission from the complainant to forward their complaint to the proper investigating authority. And F, if a complainant asks the board not to investigate a case that falls under the board's mandate and the charter, the board shall weigh the interests of community concerns and the need for justice against the wishes of the complainant and or their attorney if there is one.
Are there any questions or concerns for D, E, or F? Can we move on? Very good, we can.
Okay. My turn.
Yes, A7.
A7, complaints not involving community members. A, internal affairs should investigate violations that do not impact the community.
Go ahead,
I'm looking at the note that staff is writing, to see if it,
go ahead, staff.
Apologies, just couldn't find the exact words, but the subcommittee at right before referring this, because the decision on internal affairs is coming up in a future phase and what to recommend there, basically came up with a phrase that was broader, meaning another city investigatory entity. And I think that may be the same phrase as was used above, and perhaps a member of the subcommittee could remember, but we'll circle back on this one. Apologies.
okay, I was hoping you'd remember what that was. Okay, so 1, for example, taking home a police car for personal use would not be investigated by the board unless that vehicle then runs into another car or person or is used for intimidation. Should I go ahead and read B?
Yes, please.
Okay. Officers who file complaints against other officers should have the ability to ask the board to investigate to ensure an impartial review. 1, however, when bureau and supervisors generate complaints about poor member performance or other work rule violations, period, that should be a period, responsible unit managers are responsible for intake and investigation.
All right, Commissioner Dan, Co-Chair Dan.
Sorry about that. Again, I keep forgetting to mute my phone. Yeah, there actually is appropriate to have a comment there. So it's, however, when bureau supervisors generate complaints about poor member performance or other work rule violations, comma, responsible unit managers, which we were going to define, but we couldn't find a definition anywhere, are responsible for intake and investigation. Basically, those are some level of supervisor within the bureau, and I've been doing this for a long time. I still don't really understand exactly how that's defined in the bureau, and I couldn't find it by poking around. So we'll flag that for a definition. But it's basically a supervisor over. It's not a sergeant. It's somebody above the level of sergeant. And I put in staff A4B where we put move the parenthesis before. You can find the internal affairs language.
A4B.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Any Commissioner Monica?
So is this here so that police officers are not using the board to basically rat out other police officers about things like you're tardy, you're not, doing parts of, job performance instead of actual policing with community, right? Is that what that is there for?
Yes, yeah, and
Okay.
we can find footnote 37. That kind of explains where we got that from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got it.
Thanks. That's from Portland City Code.
Okay. So, yeah, is there, or I'm gonna have to go back, I believe, staff to A7. And you're going to update internal affairs?
Yeah, we'll get that done. I don't want to take away time while I move copy paste, but yeah. We'll just
Okay,
use the phrase as was above in every instance of internal affairs as we go.
okay, very good. Any other questions or concerns? Can we move on? Yes, we can. A8.
Okay, now I remember why I was assigned this one, because this is kind of complicated, but preliminary investigations, which you remember from the flow chart. When the board receives a complaint involving a bureau member, the staff shall, 1, assign a case number, 2, conduct a preliminary investigation, including gathering information about the complaint through an intake interview, 3, make a decision about whether the case should be investigated, suggested for mediation, addressed by some other means, or dismissed. 4, if appropriate for full investigation, identify the complainant's allegations. And 5, communicate to the complainant, summarizing the complaint and the case handling decision. And then there's more about that in A5B later, previously. And it's probably A5 Roman numeral 2 at this point, staff, but we'll figure that stuff out later, I guess.
Are there any questions or concerns about A8A 1 through 5? Can we move on? Thank you.
Okay, let's go on to B then. Informal complaint. And we didn't call it this in the flow chart, but this is what it is. Informal complaint. If the complainant expresses an interest in resolving the complaint informally through discussion with the officer supervisor, the board shall determine whether such resolution is appropriate. 1, the supervisor shall make a determination whether to resolve the case informally or send it back to the board for full investigation. 2, once approved, a case will be resolved this way without formal investigation, and the complainant will be informed of this decision. And 3, if the case is sent on for full investigation, the board will inform the complainant. And just as a reminder, we had the director of independent police review speak to it. I can't remember if it was in a full commission meeting or subcommittee, and said how surprised he was that a lot of times that's all people want to do is just talk to the supervisor. But this contemplates that for that to happen, either the board has to say it's okay, and then even if they do, if the supervisor says, you know what, this person's got some problems, I want you to investigate it, that doesn't guarantee that something bad will happen to the officer. So even if the supervisor is doing that because they have it in for them, the board still does the investigation. So there's some protection for officers as well as community members in this.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns in section B? Can we move on? Thank you. A9 dismissals.
I took this one too. All right, so dismissals. A, after a preliminary investigation, the board may dismiss the case. 1, if the case is dismissed, the board will provide notification to the complainant. 2, the board will also notify the involved officers and the commanding officer once the appeal deadline has passed. And it says see appeal section. So I just want to flag this. We don't have to discuss it right now, but we did not describe specifically how the complainant files an appeal about dismissal here, and we may want to think about doing that later down the line. B, the board may dismiss a complaint for the following reasons, but may wish to initiate potential policy recommendations from dismissed complaints. 1, the complaint is only related to criminal charges or alleged violations against the complainant and does not allege misconduct. Alleged violations against the complainant, right? This is, okay, sorry, I read that badly. Let me do that again. So 1, the complaint is only related to criminal charges or alleged violations against the complainant and does not allege misconduct. And I'll give an example. that officer gave me a ticket and I was only going 75, not 80. Okay. 2, the complainant delayed too long in filing the complaint to justify initiating an investigation. And we have a timeline to files reference. 3, even if all aspects of the complaint were true, no act of misconduct would have occurred or it would be so minor that it would not justify the time spent investigating. 4, maybe I should have stopped. 4, the complainant withdraws the complaint or fails to complete the necessary steps to continue with the complaint. It may benefit the community to finish the investigation. However, lack of cooperation and lack of consent from the complainant may make it impossible or inappropriate to complete the investigation. Number 5 is lack of jurisdiction, which is mentioned. We did mention that before in A6E. There should be a period there. And number 6, for the duration of the U.S. Department of Justice agreement, cases alleging excessive force shall only be dismissed when there is clear and convincing evidence that the allegation has, quote, no basis in fact. And that's language directly lifted out of the settlement agreement. We were hoping to do some more research with the people who follow those cases to see if that's something we can change. So we feel like probably this commission, at least most of us on the subcommittee, would like to see all use of force allegations investigated. But right now we're leaving it this way as proposed. So sorry, I went past Dr. Moses, past
okay.
one screen.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's go scroll back up to B1, 2, and 3. Are there any questions or concerns on B1, 2, and 3? Can we move on? Thank you. Let's go.
Did we cover A already? I think I just kept reading. Yeah.
Oh,
That's
I
about-
apologize. Okay. And are there any questions on A1 and 2? Questions or concerns? Can we move on? Yes, we can. Thank you. B4, 5, and 6. Any questions or concerns? Can we move on? Beautiful. Excellent. Let's take a break. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 7:50, 7:50. Thank you, everyone. You're doing a great job. Thank you so much. You're back. Section B and C each have 5 subsections, so we are on a roll. This is great. So section B, investigations. Charlie, if you're up, you're on mute.
Got it. Okay. B, investigations. B1, referral of criminal investigations. A board has the authority to refer cases to the district attorney or other authority for criminal investigation when the incident or allegations indicate possible criminal activity by the officer or officers.
Are there any questions or concerns on B1A? Can we move on? We can move on.
Okay.
Now well, go ahead.
Yeah, you're going to take over from here as we
because
planned.
there are 13 subsections of B2.
Yeah.
Okay.
So strap yourselves in, get comfortable. So we're going to do this one screen at a time, I guess. Dr. Moses seems like the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think
okay.
that is. Let's go from A to D on this. Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
great. Okay. B2, basic elements of a misconduct investigation. A, beyond the basic elements listed here, the board shall determine investigative procedures to provide guidance for staff operations. B, investigation shall follow federal and state constitutions and laws, city charter, board rules and regulations, relevant collective bargaining agreements, and the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement Ethics Code regarding personal integrity, independent and thorough oversight, transparency and confidentiality, respectful and unbiased treatment, outreach and relationships with stakeholders, agency self-examination, and commitment to policy review, professional excellence, and primary obligation to the community. and you can all look at the details of that. There's a footnote for that. C, in all investigations involving officer-involved shootings and other cases which may involve criminal misconduct, officers shall receive Lieberger/Garrity warnings, we should probably flag that for definition, that they are being compelled to testify for administrative investigation, and the content of the interview cannot be used in a criminal proceeding. And D, investigations must be ethical, independent, thorough, timely, fair, and impartial. And just about the Lieberger and Garrity warnings, that we covered that in access information. That's the thing where they say, you know, we're saying you have to answer our questions or else we can discipline you up to firing you. But because you're doing this as part of your job, you have to answer our questions or we have the right to discipline you. So we can't turn over whatever you say to criminal investigators, but we need your answers. So that was, you know, again, we covered that in access to information. Just a reminder.
Thank you for that clarity. Are there any questions or concerns with B2, A through D? Can we move on? Thank you. We can move on.
All right. So how much farther does G go after that, staff? Oh, that's it. Okay, great. So let's do E, F, and G.
Yeah.
Dr. Moose, okay. E, investigation shall include, if these elements exist and are reasonably available, 1, interviews of the complainant, officers, and witnesses. 2, gathering evidence, including photos, videos, proof of injuries, and other relevant medical records. 3, examining police roll calls, logs, assignments, and other relevant information. And 4, site visits as deemed appropriate. F, interviews with officers are all recorded, period. G, interviews with community members will be recorded unless the community member requests not to be recorded. In these instances, the request by the community member shall be documented, and a stenographer will be enlisted to ensure the interviewee's answers are captured accurately. And sub 1 there is, however, a community member concerned about the confidentiality of certain information may request that parts of their transcript be redacted for confidentiality purposes, so long as the redaction does not interfere with the ability to fully investigate or due process rights of the officer. Just kind of a call back to that earlier thing that Commissioner McDowell told us about.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns with E through G1? Can we move on? We
Right.
can move on.
All right. Let's see how far it goes now. H, I forget how many letters in the alphabet there are. Let's do H, I, and J together.
Yes.
Civilian interviews can take place at locations other than the oversight body's office. That's H. I is incomplete complaints can be investigated if the oversight body determines investigation is warranted. And J, investigation shall be completed even if an officer retires, resigns, or is fired.
Are there any questions or concerns on H through J? Can we move on? We can move on.
I'm watching Co-Chair Oriana Bauer. All right, K through O, we'll do all in. O is something, by the way, subcommittee members, be aware that O is something that we added to, I'll explain when we get to it. So K, anonymous complaints and complaints with unidentified officers will be investigated to the full extent possible, and if necessary, left open pending identifying the persons involved as needed. L, investigators shall have access to and be authorized to examine and copy, without payment of a fee, any Bureau information and records, including confidential and legally privileged information and records, so long as privilege is not waived as to third parties and police databases subject to any applicable state or federal laws. That's a mouthful. And again, that's also in access to information. M, all Bureau employees shall be truthful, professional, and courteous in all interactions with the board. No member shall conceal, impede, or interfere with the filing, investigation, or determination of findings of a complaint. And you know what? I think I'm going to hold off on N and O for the time being. Can we just do those K, L, M, N together, and we'll get back to those other two?
Do we have any questions or concerns on K, L, or M? Can we move on? Yes, we can move on.
Okay, great. So N it says information on compelling officer testimony, subpoenas, and other related items such as keeping confidential information shall be included from the access to information subcommittee's work. So in other words, instead of putting it here in our outline, knowing the other subcommittee was doing this already, we just put this paragraph in here to flag that that's where it's going to go. And then again, subcommittee members, co-chair Michelle Wesley and I proposed this language because of that little thing in the flow chart that imagines an appeal being possible and at this point in the process. And it will also tell you that when we get to section E, you'll see that that's where it's referred to. If for any reason during the process, investigators come to a decision that there is not enough information to finish the investigation, the complainant has the right to appeal that decision by providing further information.
Very good. Are there any questions or concerns about N or O? Is there strong opposition to adding O? Is there general agreement to adding O? I see general agreement. Thank you so very much. B3.
Okay, that's my co-chairs.
Can we move on? Yes. Charlie, if you are speaking, you're on mute.
I got dogs barking.
Okay.
Dan, do you want to take this one and let me deal with them?
Okay.
Thank you.
B3 is timelines to complete investigations. A says that investigations shall be completed in 180 days or less. An investigation reaching the 180-day timeline will continue until resolved. 1, if investigators are unable to meet these timeframe targets, the staff shall undertake and provide written review of the process for the board to identify the source of the delays and implement an action plan for reducing future delays. 2, informal complaints shall be resolved in 60 days or less. 3, these timelines may be extended if more time is needed, including at the request of the complainant and or their attorney. And 4, the investigative staff shall inform the board, the complainant and their advocates, and the officers and their advocates if an investigation goes beyond the mandated timeline. They shall also inform the officer's supervisor, the chief, and commissioner of police should those parties still be involved in the discipline process. So just the 180-day timeline and this thing about reviewing the process for problems to identify and fix them, those are from the DOJ settlement agreement, just so you know.
Thank you. Are there any questions on A 1 through 4? Staff.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Given the charter amendment, which was approved by the voters in November 2022, the positions will not be called commissioner any longer, and the police chief will report directly to the mayor. By happenstance, and this is not, it's usually this way, but the commissioner in charge of the police right now is also the mayor. But I had a question about this particular phrase as a result of that. If there was if that term was expansive enough for a post-charter amendment implementation timeframe. Just a question.
Commissioner Co-Chair Dan.
Yeah, I feel like we should flag that for future, rewording for anything we find like that might not fit under the new charter, because we're working with this charter right now, and we're going to be done this year, 2023. That charter doesn't kick in until 2025. So we were asked to do this now, so that's where we are.
Are there any other questions or concerns on A 1 through 4? Can we move on? Yep.
Co-chair, are you ready to do B, or want me to do it?
We can't hear you, Charlie.
I should just leave it off mute, I guess. Okay, B. Deadly force and death investigations are prioritized for completion.
Are there any questions or concerns on B? Can we move on? We can move on.
I'm also doing B4. Investigations of deadly force and deaths in custody. A, when an incident involves police use of deadly force or death in custody, the board shall follow these procedures. 1, board staff investigators head to the scene and collect evidence alongside criminal investigators. 2, board investigators sit in an interviews conducted for the criminal investigation. 3, when those criminal investigation interviews are completed, if there are questions about the possible administrative violations, board investigators will ask questions of witnesses and, if available, involved officers. 4, the investigation shall include.
Let's just do A 1 through 3
Okay,
at the moment. So this is B4, A 1 through 3. Are there any questions or concerns on this section? Can we move on? We can move on.
okay, so let's see, where were we? 4. The investigation shall include a review of the supervisor and others who were on the scene, including officers who used force or may have participated in use of deadly force. And B, the final investigation will also be sent to the PPB training division for an analysis to be presented to the board at the hearing on the deadly force incident.
Commissioner Dan.
So those, that last part about actually this whole section was added after we had a chat with Vice Chair of Citizen Review Committee, Yume Delgado, who sits in on a lot of current police review board hearings. And these are things that are done currently in the police review board, which is the the internal body that the police have to review deadly force and some other kinds of cases. And we didn't want to lose these important reviews. We didn't want to make it so that just because there's one officer that fired their gun, if another officer fired a less lethal weapon, or if the supervisor came on the scene and did something wrong, we want to make sure that those get looked at as well. And then the training division analysis also seems to be an important thing. That's one of the places where the board might actually benefit from being informed by the training division's input. So that's why we put this in. And just for the record, it says the officer who may have precipitated the use of deadly force, not participated in it. So that means that if whatever they did led to the officer that pulled the trigger doing that. And I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but sometimes an officer will stand in front of a car and not jump out of the way, even though they're supposed to. And then another officer might shoot at the driver of the car, which then could run into that officer. But the point is that they shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have stood in front of the car. So that would be an example of precipitating the use of deadly force.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Are there any questions or concerns on section 4, A or B? Can we move on? We can move on. Go ahead, Charlie. Co-Chair. Oh, I'm sorry.
My turn. For
Well,
B5?
Well,
Oh, no. Oh,
I didn't
sorry.
finish that section yet, so yeah, just got B1 to do.
Go right ahead.
Okay. The community member subjected to use of deadly force or they are survivors if the interaction resulted in death shall be considered as complainants and shall have full rights to appeal. 1, in cases in which survivors choose not to file a complaint, the investigation shall still be handled in the same way as all other misconduct investigations.
Any questions or concerns on section B and B1? Can we move on? We can move on. B5.
My apologies. I forgot there was a B that we hadn't done. So this is B5. Information provided to officers. A, when an investigation begins, the officer shall be informed in writing, 1, of the nature of the investigation, 2, whether the member is a witness or an involved member, and 3, other information necessary to reasonably inform the involved member of the nature of the allegations, including the time, date, and location of the incident, if known. 4, no information that would compromise the integrity of the investigation shall be shared with the involved officer.
Are there any questions or concerns on B5A 1 through 4? Can we move on? Thank you so much. Section C, findings.
Oh boy, it's back to me already. Okay, C. Findings. C1, determination process and findings. A, findings are determined using the preponderance of evidence standard. There's a footnote there. B, the oversight body uses a standard set of 4 options for findings in all cases. 1, oops, where'd it go?
I don't know.
Staff?
You're not sharing it.
Sorry, did it just disappear? Sorry, wait just a
Yes.
second. Apologies.
That's okay.
Well, I can read from my hard copy.
Okay, well, while we're waiting to see who's pulled up, though, I think preponderance of the evidence was one of the things we wanted to put in the definition sections as well. I'm a little surprised that we pulled that out. Thank you.
I am keeping track of those if nobody else is. Okay.
Commissioner, Co-Chair Charlie will come back at the end to do the garden plot. So.
Oh, yes.
We can name those things then.
Okay.
Just one second, Commissioner Ajay, you have a question?
Yeah, I know that this is going to be defined, but in terms of burden of proof, can you just quickly remind me, and I don't want to necessarily discuss it just so I can do my own research, but the different types of burdens of proof? Because I know preponderance of evidence is one standard, but there are like, what, 2 others or something like that?
Commissioner Dan?
Yeah, well, actually, I was trying to find the older draft. We actually listed those all in the older draft and in the research document that we approved. So one of them was clear and convincing evidence, which is what we talked about for that the IPR uses now in order to dismiss a use of force allegation. That's a very high standard. And there's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what they use in criminal cases, which is even higher. And then there's actually a lower standard, which we came across in the due process. We'll get to in the due process section. But preponderance of the evidence just means 50% plus 1. A little bit, anything more than 50% of the evidence says that the either the officer violated policy, the officer didn't violate policy, or that the case, the allegation didn't happen as it was alleged. And we'll get to all those below. But it's 50% plus 1 of the evidence. Think of it that way. Is that helpful?
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, go ahead and continue, Co-Chair Dan.
I believe this is Charlie's time. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize.
I believe I was on B.
Yes.
The oversight body uses standard set of 4 options for findings in all cases. 1, out of policy, meaning the action is found to have violated policy. In some jurisdictions, this is known as sustained. 2, in policy, meaning the officer's actions were within the law and policy. In some jurisdictions, this is known as exonerated. 3, unfounded, meaning the evidence shows the alleged events did not occur. And 4, insufficient evidence, meaning there's not enough information or evidence to attach any of the other findings.
Are there any questions or concerns on C1, A, B, 1 through 4? Can we move on? Thank you. Let's go to C.
C. Right, there we go. The board may also add these additional findings related to systemic aspects of the case, which led to interaction that caused the complaint. 1, policy failure, meaning the board recommends that the Bureau revise its policy. 2, training failure, meaning the board recommends that the Bureau revise its training. 3, supervisory failure, meaning someone in the chain of command supervising the officer engaged in an action that led to the incident.
Go ahead and read 4 and 5 if you don't mind.
Okay. Okay, 4, communication failure, meaning officers did not communicate well among themselves or information was otherwise not properly relayed to the involved officers. And 5, equipment failure, meaning the equipment provided did not function properly or was not adequate.
Are there any questions or concerns on section C 1 through 5? Commissioner Dan.
I just want to flag this to put the language that we used in the structural oversight document that we passed last week or on Monday. It's so time flies, folks. To put the language, I think we called these the systemic findings or something like that. I don't remember, and I don't want to take time to deal with it. So maybe in parentheses after the opening, just label it the same way.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns on this, on C 1 through 5? Can we move on? I see nodding heads, yes.
Okay. D, all of these findings shall be applied. You're moving the screen around. Shall be applied whether the case is generated by a complaint or if the board investigates as required by city code and charter. 1, whether the body or supervisor investigating officer complaints not involving community members conducts an investigation. These findings shall also be used for consistency. These findings shall also be used for consistency by other body or supervisor who investigates officer complaints, which do not involve community members.
Are there any questions or concerns about D and D1? Can we move on? Staff.
Just wanted to make a quick note that some formatting got lost here. This first half of D1 was an old version of the text and is actually not there. This is the actual text that was referred by the document. So it was changed from the part that is now in strike through by the subcommittee to the part that is now not in strike through. So apologies for the redundancy there. Just looked weird and I double checked.
Thank you so much for that. I believe we can we move on? Yes. C2.
Righty. C2 is mine. I'm doing C2 and C3, just as a heads up. C2, hearings, preliminary hearings, and panels. A, the board may create panels to hear cases to determine findings about whether policies were violated. 1, panels shall be no smaller than 5 board members. 2, in more serious cases, these panels shall have more members than in other cases. 3, the panel shall be created to ensure diversity based on life experience, race, gender, and other factors, including, if appropriate, whether members are nominated by different people or entities, period. And 4, each panel shall have a presiding individual over each hearing.
There are any questions?
And I just want to flag for the record, because I've stood aside a lot of times while we've been deliberating with each other, and that there was one member of the subcommittee who stood aside on the defining specifically that we should have 5 people on the hearings panel, but I think the rest of us came to consensus on that. So I just want to acknowledge that minority opinion as per our ground rules.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns on C2, A1 through 4? Can we move on? I see nodding heads and happy fingers. Thank you so much.
Okay, so B, the board can take interim steps prior to findings being determined in specific cases. Sub 1, a case can be expedited if an officer is retiring or being promoted. And 2, the board can recommend suspending an officer while administrative charges are pending. I think I'll do C also. C, members of the hearing panel shall review all investigative materials. Sub 1, in reviewing the case, the panel may examine any supporting documents, the file and report of the staff, and any documents accumulated during the investigation. They may also listen to and or watch the recordings of all interviews.
Any questions or concerns on B1, 2, or C1, C and 1? I would like to call on Commissioner Sophia and then Commissioner Seema. Welcome in.
Thank you. I have a question with 8. It's BI. So I understand expediting when a person is retiring, but I'm trying to understand for promotion, is there not a way we can request the promotion just be delayed until after it's the findings are found? I mean, do we want to push it, or do we, you know what this is where I'm going. Why do we want to push that one? Why can't we just hold that promotion, ask that promotion be held? I know it may not be our jurisdiction, but that's just a question for the group.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Commissioner Dan, and then Commissioner Seema.
Yeah, I think that was language we lifted from New York. I think we probably mean a case can be prioritized, not expedited. So it would still get a thorough investigation. It would just be prioritized so that the officer wouldn't have it hanging over their head while they're waiting to find out they got a promotion. So if it's okay, I'd like to propose a word change. The case can be prioritized. Does that help you, Commissioner Glenn?
Yes. I still think that I wanted to know if there was a way to just have that promotion be held until after the findings. My whole point is, what if they get promoted and it's still not finished? Maybe they don't promote it. So that's my whole point. Is if it just could be delayed, the promotion until after the findings are complete. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I agree and understand where you're coming from. I think that right now that is what happens a lot, where they get held back because this investigation is going on. So I think this is to try to break through that logjam. I think that the Bureau on their end is, we can't really direct them what to do about promotions, but I think that happens already. Like if they know that the person is being investigated, they put it off. And sometimes these investigations take more than 180 days. And so that's the idea of prioritizing those cases, not to make it so that somebody who could soon be found guilty of misconduct will get promoted and then demoted if it's completed afterward.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Commissioner Seema.
Actually, I think Dan may have just answered an extension of the question that I had that Commissioner Glenn had, which I second. Dan, what did you just say? What did you just wrap up with?
I said that I believe that that's the Bureau's decision whether or not to promote somebody, but that they currently do not promote somebody if they have a misconduct investigation hanging over their head, so they wouldn't have to promote them and then demote them if they get found guilty of misconduct. The idea of this sentence, prioritize it so that that process won't take more than 180 days. So that it will take time as a regular investigation, but be put toward the front of the line so that they can figure that out faster, whether or not to promote.
Yeah, so I think one of my clarifications, and if we reflect on a more recent case when it came to Officer DeLong, who had shot Mr. Delgado fatally recently. I believe during that period of time of investigation, he had, and correct me, I could be wrong. I don't have access to being able to look it back up, but I do believe that he was promoted even during that investigative time, where he had a use of force that resulted in the death of their so-called suspect. So I think these are types of things that we should probably kind of reflect on to be able to see, like, okay, are we strengthening the concern that Commissioner Glenn brought up?
Thank you, Commissioner Sema. Commissioner Glenn.
Yes, I was just gonna make a suggestion for the group that maybe and I and two, we add something recommending delaying a promotion as well as suspending while charges are pending.
Co-Chair Dan. Oh, I see. In section B2, staff are clarifying. The board can recommend suspending an officer or delaying promotion while administrative charges are pending. Very good. On B1, a case can be prioritized if an officer is retiring or being promoted. Is there strong opposition to changing the wording to what it is now? Is there general agreement to changing the wording to what it is now? We see general agreement. I'm going to read the B2 when we go back there. And staff shares, yep. Okay, the board can recommend suspending an officer or delaying promotion while administrative charges are pending. Is there strong opposition to changing from what it was to what it is now? Is there general agreement to changing from what it was to what it is now? I see general agreement. Thank you so much.
Is it back to me then?
I believe
Or
it
do we
is.
have to ask if we're ready to move on?
Are we ready to move on? Yes, we are.
All right, so C, members of the hearing panel shall review all investigative materials. I think I did this one already. Where did I stop? Oh, well, we did, but I guess we didn't recover it because we went back to fix that.
Right. So are there any questions or concerns on section C? Can we move on? We can move on.
Okay, so E then. The panel shall hold a public preliminary hearing to assess the completeness and readiness of the investigation for a full hearing. 1, the complainant and officer will be notified of the date of the preliminary hearing, but are not required to attend. They may appear with any or all of their support persons. 2, public comment on the readiness of the investigation will be taken before the panel makes a decision whether to proceed. And E, the panel will decide whether to, 1, send a case back for further investigation, specifying the information sought, or 2, send the case forward to a full hearing. And I know for some folks, this will seem like an extra step that's unnecessary, but observing the current system for many years, they added this in, and me and my group, Portland Cop Watch, objected to it at first, but it actually helps make a better hearing ultimately. So that's why we're proposing to keep that in and put that as part of the new system.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or concerns on sections D1 and 2 and E1 and 2? Can we move on? Thank you. C3.
Okay,
hearing
so I'm also doing C3. And I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but we envisioned only getting through C1 tonight, so we're doing great, folks. Okay, C3, hearings process. A, the board will hold open hearings on misconduct complaints and investigations. The hearing shall be recorded. 1, public notice of hearing shall be posted at least 7 business days before the hearing date. 2, in limited specific circumstances defined by state or federal law, parts of the hearings can be held without being open to the public. 3, examples of reasons to close the hearings to the public include to protect the identity of a victim or private medical information. 4, while details protected in closed session are confidential, decisions shall be made publicly. 5, throughout the hearing process, the chair or presiding individual shall remind the audience of the seriousness of the employment matter being discussed while acknowledging community responses. And 6, a person from upper management of the Bureau's training division shall attend all hearings to answer questions about police policy, training, or procedure.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Do we need to address the note on the side?
Oh, what does it say? Oh,
PPA guarantees 61.9.1.3.
yeah, these are questions we can put into like a bin of stuff for us to examine later on. I don't think it's going to affect our passing this document tonight.
Very good. Are there any questions or concerns on C3A 1 through 6? Can we move on? We can move on to B.
So just to be transparent, both to the other 12 members of the commission who weren't on the subcommittee and to the public, that we included a lot of those kind of notes in the original draft of this, and some of them are still here, to try to show the deliberative process that we use to get to the point where we are. And that's also why we have so many footnotes. All right. So you got a okay to move on?
Yes, it is.
Okay, B. The hearings process has accommodations to ensure accessibility. 1, the complainant can appear with their advocate as well as support person and or attorney. 2, the officer can appear with their bargaining unit representative / advocate and or their attorney and or support person. 3, interpreters shall be provided with adequate advance notice for arrangements to be made. And 4, other accommodations shall be made for people with disabilities.
Thank you. Are there any questions or concerns on section B 1 through 4? Can we move on? We can move on. Thank you. Section C.
E. Procedure for hearings. Note, throughout this section, complainant and officer may include their representatives. Just trying to show me how many subsections there are.
It's a long one.
Yeah.
Let's go to 1 through 6 right now.
Sure, let's do that. So the procedure for the hearings 1 through 6. 1, the basic circumstances of the case and allegations shall be read into the record at the beginning of the hearing. 2, the complainant and officer can make opening statements. The complainant can choose whether to provide their statement before or after the officer. 3, the presiding individual begins questions of witnesses followed by other panel members. 4, board staff can ask questions at the invitation of the presiding individual. 5, the officer or complainant can request specific items about which the panel may ask more questions. 6, once recognized by the presiding individual, the complainant and officers have the ability, there shouldn't be a comma there. The complainant and officers have the ability to ask questions, request additional questions. So after it says the complainant and officers staff, they're in 6. Yeah, that comma shouldn't be there. So once recognized by the presiding individual, the complainant and officers have the ability to ask questions, request additional questions, call witnesses, introduce exhibits, cross-examine witnesses, and suggest that the panel impeach witnesses. The Oversight Board shall establish guidelines and methods for these processes.
Are there any questions or concerns on C 1 through 6? Can we move on? Yes, we can.
So 7, I believe the complainant and officer can then offer rebuttals. 8, the officer and complainant can make closing statements. 9, the panel deliberates on the evidence. 10, public input shall be taken before the panel's final deliberation and decision. 11, should there be outstanding issues regarding evidence that can be obtained, the panel may decide to send the case back one time for further investigation specifying the information sought. And 12, the panel decides findings with each member explaining their vote.
Are there any questions or concerns on sections 7 through 12? Are there any, Co-Chair Dan, do we need to pay attention to, okay, staff?
Yeah, there is a question on should there be a limit on how long this explanation can be, and this was not determined by the subcommittee. If I can opine, I think that that's probably something that would likely fall into either the oversight board's, probably the oversight board's bylaws, or something like that. If not, it would certainly be in the next phase if it was a PAC conversation. So just wanted to note that, not to say that there should or shouldn't be a limit or what it should or shouldn't be, just to say where it should be discussed.
Thank you so much, staff.
Yeah, and before we move on, I just want to say that that one about number 10 that says public input shall be taken, that is in the current city code right now. It was a very hard fought thing from the community, and the chair of the CRC and other CRC members went to city council to make sure that that would happen. So I just want to make sure that doesn't get lost again in the transition. So on to number 13. Oh, there's a question.
No. I have a co-chair Charlie and then co-chair Ajay. And the Commissioner Ajay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I was just wondering, like in 10, it instead of vote, you said decision. So I'm wondering if in 12, it should be decision instead of vote. Just to be consistent.
Staff?
I have no objection to that.
So there was a subcommittee decision to change all of the questions around voting to decision. That was the word that we talked about, and we didn't go through each one. And so in preparing this document and reformatting it and trying to implement that, I struggled with how with this particular one, because all the others are about the groups coming to some sort of answer, which is a decision. But when it's an individual person expressing it, that grammatically it didn't seem to make sense. So I had the thought of position or some sort of word like that, but that wasn't authorized by the subcommittee. And so as staff, I didn't think it was appropriate to implement that unilaterally, but I wanted to suggest that if this came up, or some word that distinguishes from an individual's expressed opinion, formally expressed opinion versus a group determination. I don't know if that helps or hurts anything, but I figured I'd flag it as an option.
All right, well, co-chair, let's put position in there. What do you think? Claiming their position. Is there another hand, Dr. Moses?
Yes, Commissioner Ajay.
Yeah, for number 11, I was just wondering about the send the case back one time. Is that like a one-time limit that they have? Like, so if, for example, they got more information and then information actually caused them to have more questions, would they not be able to go back again?
So just saying, we pulled this from the current code. This was outlined in the DOJ agreement as well. I understand what you're saying. I think we should make sure that this is done thoroughly. We're also trying to make sure it gets done in a timely way. I wouldn't object to pulling out the words one time if you want to do that, and somebody else can decide that later. But can send the case back for further investigation. Fair enough?
All right, on number 11, should there still be outstanding issues regarding evidence that can be obtained, the panel may decide to send the case back for further investigation, specifying the information sought. Is there strong opposition to changing the sentence to what it is now? Is there general agreement in changing the sentence to what it is now? I see agreement. On number 12, the panel decides findings with each member explaining their position. Is there strong opposition to changing the sentence to what it is now? Is there general agreement to changing the sentence to what it is now? I see general agreement. Thank you. Can we move on?
So we're on 13, I think.
13, yes.
Number 13. Those who disagree can include their dissenting information along with the findings. 14, when a decision is made at the end of a public hearing, the presiding individual should explain the next steps, including the appeal process. If any finding is made outside the public hearing process where an appeal is still possible, or the complainant does not appear at the hearing, a board representative can explain the process or delegate that responsibility to staff, I think. Just making a little word proposal there, delegate that responsibility to staff. D, should the panel decide that one or more allegations is in violation of Bureau policy, is or are, they will move to a decision on the discipline for the involved officer, which shall also be decided. Yeah, I'm not sure is or are, how we do that. E, hearings can be held even if the parties fail to appear. And F, the panel may receive oral or written statements volunteered by the complainant or member or other officers involved or any other person.
Are there any questions or concerns on 13 through F? Can we move on? Very good.
So, and I believe that that's the end of section 3.
No, we have F1 and 2. Commissioner Seamob.
Hey, yeah, on section F on that last part. So the panel may, this is maybe just something clarifying for me. Oh, it disappeared.
There it is.
Oh, yeah, there it is. The panel may receive any oral or written statements volunteered by the complainant or the member or other officers involved or any other person. This other than the officer involved. Like this says other officers involved, right?
Yeah, it
So
should say
this is excluding the officer that complainant is about.
that's not what the intent is. That the member name there should be the involved member. We may not have been using that term throughout, but that's what the intent is. And this is also pulled from current city code. That all right, Commissioner Hussaini, did I fix it?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Great. So then, thank you, Dr. Moses. I didn't realize F1 and 2. So F1, hearsay is admissible. Evidence is allowed if responsible persons are accustomed to using such information in serious affairs, and that's a term of art and law. 2, when the hearing process develops new information, the panel may consider the new information when determining if additional investigation is warranted, but the panel may not use that new information to determine findings.
Are there any, Commissioner Catherine?
Thank you. This is a minor thing, but I think I just don't think that those are sub points of section F. It seems to me they're standalone points. So, should be G and H. you know, it doesn't, I think the way it's written is it would suggest that hearsay is only admissible in these statements volunteered by folks, as opposed to some other, you know, way of it being presented as a part of the evidence. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
I think that's very reasonable. And I also want to thank you, Commissioner McDowell, for, educating the subcommittee that hearsay is admissible in many administrative hearings. So that was helpful for us to know.
Yeah, that is standard.
Commissioner Monica.
Can you help me understand why this new information would not be used to determine findings? I'm missing something here and I'm not getting.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll use kind of a real world example. If somebody could come in with a piece of paper that said and say, I got this piece of paper that proves that I'm the owner of this piece of property. And then if the board makes a decision and that person faked that, or if it wasn't accurate, or if it was outdated, and you know, so just if somebody brings a piece of information to the board, it should be sent back for verification. That was the idea. And for people listening, that was another thing that we used to object to at Cop Watch, but you know, sort of thinking this through, I think is an important step.
Thank you. Let's do F. The panel may receive any oral or written statements volunteered by the complainant or the involved member or other officers involved or any other person. Is there strong opposition to changing the proposed language? Is there general agreement to changing the proposed language? I see agreement. Thank you. On G and H, is there strong opposition to changing these to G and H? Is there general agreement to changing these to G and H? Wonderful. Thank you. May we move on?
I believe this is where the Uber co-chairs asked us to stop this evening. So
exactly.
It's actually a relatively good stopping point.
Yes, congratulations, everyone. We've gone through C3. We've done this so well. I'm going to turn this over to, yes, the Uber co-chairs, Tirsa and Christian. 8:45.
And Ajay.
Ajay as well, yes, I was
I'm
about
sorry.
to say
And
that.
Ajay, I apologize. Yes, if I don't write it down, it doesn't exist. I apologize.
Well, we want to use this time to talk about the transition plan for the upcoming phase of the PAC's work. As of right now, our last meeting for this current phase is set to be this upcoming Monday, February the 13th. And so we are asking, we're asking for people to step up and volunteer if they would like to be co-chairs for the upcoming phase, as well as subcommittee co-chairs. It's sort of what we want to use this time for, since this phase of work is fast approaching. And so
Yeah, I think that and the discussion around well, staff just raised their hand, I'll let them cover it, but this discussion around subcommittees too, which I think there was some information on that in the emails that were sent out as well.
I'd like to toss it to staff if that's okay, co-chairs. All right. Okay,
Yeah, thanks. So the phase of work transition tasks, each phase, this is not unique to this particular transition between the third and fourth phase, includes a few different things, one of which is review of the organizational phase documents. If there are proposed changes, the commission completed that task on the 19th and 26th. It includes discussing co-chairs for the next phase, which is on the agenda for next Monday, the 13th. So just to finish the thought that Co-Chair Tirsa started on, there's an email that went around asking for members to volunteer. Thank you to those who already have. We'll be circulating a list so that everyone has time leading up to the Monday meeting to know who all is interested over the weekend, that you'll have time to kind of review that. So that is a request for both full commission co-chairs for the next phase and for the subcommittees. And in order to be able to have subcommittee co-chairs prior to the subcommittees starting to meet, it would be helpful to have at least some of the subcommittee co-chairs be selected beginning next Monday. And in order to do that, it requires knowing what the subcommittees are, which is obviously, it would be hard to say I'd like to be a co-chair of a subcommittee when you don't know what the subcommittee is. So with that said, the full commission co-chairs are allowed to choose what the subcommittees are. The full commission members are also allowed to determine what the subcommittees are. The bylaws allow for either group to make that determination. And so while we're not talking about who the co-chairs will be today, just reminding you to please, throw your hat into the ring if you're interested. We are going to talk possibly about what the subcommittees should be, because full commission co-chairs would like to at least provide that opportunity to the full commission before, if it's impossible to come to consensus today, then they may need to revisit making the decision themselves. Is that accurate, full commission co-chairs? I don't want to overstate.
No, that's about accurate. Yeah, from my perspective, definitely.
Great. So we did start discussing this on the 26th. It was right at the end of the meeting. There was no immediate consensus, and so we were essentially unable to come to a conclusion of it at that time. But there was a proposal from the full commission co-chairs to do what was in the draft work plan that we talked about on the 19th, which is, I'll just screen share if you'll bear with me a moment here. And this may be helpful to know what's coming up in the next phase of work as sort of a task list as well. So you've all seen a lot of this already, and, the timeline and all that. As of right now, the timeline remains through June 9th. There's been no additional information from council to that end yet. We had like our work plans. We went over those from the previous phases, the current one and the two previous. This is what is required in the structure and details phase as per the commission's previous decision on in the agenda and scope. And then there was the outcome documents, which were required to cover at least these areas. And the proposal was to combine to get down to 3, so that there didn't need to be multiple subcommittees, and to have 3 subcommittees, one on board membership, one on oversight agency, one on transparency and reporting. And so that was the proposal that was both in the staff proposed work plan and in the co-chairs proposed on the 26th. There wasn't immediate consensus, but that is sort of the beginning of the conversation. And wanted to open up and pass back to Dr. Moses to facilitate the conversation about that proposal, and possibly come to consensus as a commission on what the subcommittees for the next phase of work should be.
glad to take that on. Comments, questions, suggestions?
I can open it up really quick.
Well,
sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go right
Sorry,
ahead.
apologies.
No, right ahead.
I'll just say that I mean, we talked about this at the other meeting as well when we first proposed this, but the structure, there's other proposals on the table as well, which I'm sure we'll get to. But this one is basically just the same thing that we did this phase of work with the 3 subcommittees. So the work plan is essentially the same as this one. That's just to visualize a little bit more how this one would go in the next phase.
Thank you so much, co-chair. I did see someone's hand up, but now they put it down. Oh, I think it was Commissioner Angie. Did you have a question? You're on mute, Commissioner.
Yeah, sorry. I was okay. Sorry. I thought I hit the wrong button and left the meeting. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to put me my if you need co-chairs, you know that you can only if we don't have anybody else, I will step up. But I did like the structure. I know that this phase of work was a lot of work. I know that the co-chairs put in a lot of work, and everybody on all the committee subcommittees had to put in a lot of work. But you know, we just have a lot of work to do right now, and to try to get through this and do this in a coherent way. I know that it's a lot of work though. So thank you everybody that has done work in the past, that is going to do work in the future. We're not done yet, but at least we have each other to do it with, right? Yes. So
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Commissioner Angie. Commissioner Co-Chair Dan.
Well, I'm not a co-chair in this context, just to be clear.
Okay.
What I had proposed at the previous meeting where this came up was to combine the staffing and the board membership into one subcommittee, because there's going to be questions that are going to overlap about who does what and how they're going to interrelate. And I think it'd be important to have that kind of communication. I mean, in this past phase, I sat on 2 subcommittees, a couple other people sat on 2 subcommittees. I think that was very helpful, but we can't guarantee that it'll happen again. So my proposal was to combine the 2 into one, and looking at the staff's proposed timeline, where one of the things they're trying to avoid is having us have 2 meetings of the same subcommittee within a week so that people have a rest. My proposal really included the idea that it would be a subcommittee on the structure of the oversight board that would have working groups on the staff and working group on the board membership, so that those could meet kind of overlapping, but there would be a full meeting of that subcommittee to start off to define what the terms are and all that, and maybe from time to time a full meeting of the subcommittee where it breaks into 2 work groups. And we tried that. It was a little bumpy, but we tried that during the Offshore Accountability Subcommittee one day, where we had 2 work groups going on at the same time, and it really helped us get twice as much work done in the same amount of time. So that was my counter proposal, that we could use the same amount of meetings as are proposed right now for the subcommittees as designed, and combine those 2 together.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Sophia. You're on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Weigh in and say I do agree that there's some interlocking issues with the 2 different subcommittees that are proposed, but considering how much work it is for each one of them on one subcommittee, would just I don't know who.
Your internet is breaking up, Commissioner Sophia.
Oh, did I go out?
You did.
Oh gosh, I don't know what you heard. Let me turn off my camera real quick.
I think that helps.
Okay. All right. Did you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what you heard, but I wanted to go back and let me just come back to you. Let me get my system together, okay?
Okay. Staff, I think it would be good to share that document again and go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I want to be clear before I share it that this is not a proposed calendar of meetings. It was a speculative attempt to try and do, you know, the work of figuring out how long the phase of work would take. And so I did, so as opposed to sharing it, it was emailed out to members, so I don't necessarily need to show it, but the moral of the story is with 2 meetings a week, the earliest projected date of ending the next phase of work with the proposal that co-chairs advanced was April 27th. With another possible change that hasn't been discussed yet, it was May 4th, and then with the proposal that Commissioner Dan referred to was somewhere between May 15th and 24th, which would give, and I understand that that's not necessarily a consensus position on how long it would take. That was me as a project manager trying to plan out for all possible eventualities and what it would look like. However, I did want to say that although, you know, and I want to acknowledge it is awkward as a staff member to be in a position of having an opinion on some of these issues, but I'm also the project manager specifically. And so I'm trying to advise the commission on how to get to the end point on time. And so that's why this is sort of the one exception to date that I've made in this regard, has been about, you know, project management. So I want to fully acknowledge that. But I did want to say, because I think Commissioner Dan's point about the 2 subcommittees meeting, collaborating on information is as helpful, that I did check, and 2 subcommittees can hold a joint meeting. So as a potential, if those 2 are 2 separate subcommittees as proposed by co-chairs, one on board membership and another on the oversight agency, it would definitely be possible for the 2 of those to hold a joint meeting, especially in that early phase where it's about, you know, setting the tone and understanding the scope of it, without them necessarily being a single subcommittee. And I'm sure that the co-chairs of both subcommittees would be, whoever they end up being, would be able to work together to develop the agenda for such an event. They would still be allowed to develop their content separately. And you know, the last time that the commission had a joint, or I should say a single subcommittee for multiple documents, that did go on for quite a while. And it is actually the co-chairs of that subcommittee that have spoken about not doing that again so far today. So I think that's a notable point as well, but definitely possible to have a joint meeting of the 2 subcommittees. And that's not something that I knew until very recently. So just wanted to update with that information. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Debbie.
So if you're allowed to have 2 subcommittees meeting jointly, could you have those 2 subcommittees get together in a meeting and like have the first half hour talking about sort of the things that cross over, then go into breakout rooms and then come back and spend the last half hour reporting back what each of the subcommittees did in their breakout rooms? Are you allowed to do that in a public meeting?
Staff?
Yeah, yes, that is allowed. There's reasons why it's not something you would want to do all the time, but it was done to some, I think Commissioner Dan mentioned it was done by the Subcommittee on Officer Accountability once in December, and certainly in that context it was helpful. There were some logistical things to figure out, certainly, but and to improve upon logistically only, but I think yeah, it's definitely something. I wouldn't say it would be something you would do it all the time, and I don't want to promise that sort of thing, but yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Co-chair Christian and Tirsa, do we need to come to a decision this evening?
We can definitely, if there is some form of consensus, I'd be happy to. I don't know if I'm the one who would ask that, or one of us would be the one who would ask that. I also can't recall, this wouldn't be a vote, correct? I would just ask if there's consensus to okay, cool. Is there consensus to?
Well, okay, is there strong opposition?
Oh, yes,
to the
sorry, thank you. Yeah,
proposal to have
yeah.
3 subcommittees?
Oh, sorry, I think
Right.
Commissioner Handelman has.
Commissioner.
I want to understand what we're consenting on.
Yeah.
Is it now that we have the information from staff that we could combine the committees into a meeting and then even potentially have them meet simultaneously on the same night? Is that part of this proposal now?
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what I'm doing. What I understood was now that we have that information, I was going to ask if the current proposal, if the proposed subcommittee, I don't know what you call it, system structure that the co-chairs that proposed last time would be okay with everyone to use, as opposed to, now that we have that new information that the subcommittees can meet on the same day.
Commissioner Sophia and then staff.
Staff can go first.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to clarify, when what was said is that 2 distinct individual separate subcommittees could have a joint meeting where one of their meetings was the same, or more than one of their meetings was a meeting of both at the same time. And they could discuss, one side of the thing, another side of the thing. That might make sense to do not only at the beginning, but at a later point. So just to clarify, it wouldn't necessarily be only at the beginning. Just wanted to put that out there, and that's a scheduling thing that maybe with the membership and of each subcommittee and their availability, as well as with the co-chairs that are eventually still approved by the full commission for those subcommittees, could be worked out. Just to clarify, thank you.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Sophia and then Commissioner Debbie.
Okay, I just wanted to get a clarity that there would still be 3 subcommittees, and 2 of which would collaborate on some of the overlapping items. The co-chairs would coordinate that. And it might possibly be 1 joint meeting. If there's more needed, then the co-chairs would collaborate on that. I just wanted to make clear that was the understanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Sophia. Commissioner Debbie. You're on mute.
Did you call on me, Dr. Moses?
Yeah, I thought you raised.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, that's why I'm sitting here. Sorry. Okay, now I hear you. Yeah, I think I want to follow up on Commissioner Sophia. So if you had these 2 interrelated subcommittees that would meet from time to time jointly, but could separate into breakout rooms, I'm assuming it would be up to the co-chairs of the subcommittees to decide when it was appropriate to have those joint meetings. Is that the case? One of the Uber co-chairs maybe has the answer. I don't know.
Staff.
So technically, staff schedules all the meetings. That's bureau policy, but as you've seen, and as everyone who's been a co-chair has seen, that's something that we're definitely more than collaborative on and try to accommodate. For example, the thing that we did in December on the work session on the Saturday that ended up with that was by request of the co-chairs, and after figuring out what was possible to do within the confines of law, we made it happen. So, but yeah, if the co-chairs were to request that, we definitely do it.
Yeah, I think I'll throw in here as well. There are meetings where or multiple co-chairs, like from subcommittees and the full commission co-chairs, are kind of together to address agenda items and stuff. And so there is a possibility, I think they could talk about it at that meeting as well, if it was appropriate and the correct co-chairs were in the meeting.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the question. Is there strong opposition to the proposal to have 3 subcommittees? Board membership, oversight agency, and reporting and transparency. Is there general agreement to have these three committees, three subcommittees? I see general agreement. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
So just to close out next steps, and thank you on that. Again, we will be asking for volunteers to email back in with their desire to serve as co-chair for one or more of the various 4 options, full commission or the 3 subcommittees. And then we'll start that process on Monday. The second thing that'll also happen is asking members to start volunteering to be a member of the subcommittees for the next phase. And the first of those meetings will be at earliest the 23rd, but I think it's currently tentatively planned for the 27th of February that those would start meeting. And which, as a side note, would be 4 months to the day after the powers and duties phase started. And would be on track for what that phase is supposed to be. So hopefully we're able to get there by then. So that'll be 2 different requests, one for your membership preferences and the other for your possible co-chair preferences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, staff. We're now going to go to public comment. We will now take open public comment on the issues that PAC is discussing, or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you'd like to speak. Do not see any people who are raising their hands. Commissioner Charlie, do you have it?
I prefer to read this one on Monday. I think it'd be more
Very good.
appropriate. Mhm.
That's wonderful. Very good. So then I will move us on to the garden plot recap. This is time for facilitators, co-chairs, and staff to summarize any items already brought up today which did not fit into today's agenda. We'll recap those items here and use them in developing future agendas. We won't be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss any items, but we will use this list to develop future agendas so the items can be addressed. Staff, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, just the question about from the document that on officer accountability about the length of explanation of an individual member of the oversight board's position was in the garden plot, and then there are actually some things that don't need to be read out loud necessarily because we're not at them yet, but they're in the document under E3, which are also sort of pre-flagged for the garden plot as well as at the bottom of the document. So those are all there, and nothing else immediately comes to mind.
Thank you. I also had effective and constructive custody definition.
Yeah, there are 4 actually definitions that were also flagged to do. I don't know that they're necessarily garden plot. They're more of a staff will work with subcommittee co-chairs or look at the other 2 documents, some of which already had those definitions, and pull them in before the Monday meeting.
Thank you so much. Co-chairs, do you have any garden plot
Nothing.
Nope.
items? Victoria, do you have any garden plot items? Nope. Okay, very good. Then I would like to then move to our conclusion. As a reminder, you can submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postal mail. Thank you to all of the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you also to our interpreters. And finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. Next slide, please. If you have not already signed up for email updates, please also sign up to receive the updates from the PAC. The next meeting of the PAC will be Monday, February 13th at 6:30 p.m. This will be the final meeting of the powers and duties phase and may run long. It is now 9:12 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Yes, thank you, everyone. That was a
Bye.
really good one. I'll see you all on Monday.
Good night.
Great work, y'all.